Hello, and this is going to be somewhat of a varied discussion, kind of an essay of fitness and kind of why I think personally it's so popular among the sphere in general. Why you have people like BAP, for example, and just sort of the cultural significance of it, I suppose, and share my own thoughts of it, and go from there. We'll probably get weirder and more abstract as we go along. But just to start, I suppose, in my sort of defense and beginning here, it's weightlifting and trying to obtain a sort of aesthetic physique. Is probably going to be popular among lower status men who are trying to find a sort of entry level way to find a kind of direction towards their own kind of progress. And I think progress and sort of the timeline of it itself is something that's very interesting to people in our civilization. And I guess if you wanted to, kind of get into whether or not you're going to feel this video out or not, we're kind of presupposing what it means to really be a kind of individual in the community in this sort of Aristotelian kind of polis. And I think if you kind of take that, you'll really sort of start to get to understand why it's important to not just care about the well-being and the best possible health for everyone in your community. You're not just this this kind of avocado eating liberal, doing his own thing. I'm gonna live this sort of alternative lifestyle, and everyone else around me, they can do whatever they want. It doesn't affect me. That's of course not true at all. And psychology would of course renounce that. Your polis, your community, is a reflection of yourself. It's the microcosm, macrocosm, and we've been touching up on kind of how nominalism kind of doesn't really account for something like that, or it's really stripped of it, and at its philosophical beginnings, if you will. And so, if you were to want to have citizens, especially in the year 2021, with a sort of cultural immunity, if you will, a sort of defense mechanism against not living their best potential or possible life that's enriching, then you would have to consider one's own health, and not just your own, but all around you in the kind of environment and ecology that you live in. But more than that, I suppose if we were going to kind of use psychology and the sciences here, you could see something like Jonathan Haidt's work, and seeing the kind of different case selection factors, these what I would say kind of archetypes, if you will, using psychology towards political ramifications of trying to understand, why the libertarian or why the liberal thinks he is, and what that kind of represents in this sort of cultural sort of archetype of who these people are. You got the soy jacks, and obviously you have this sort of right-wing bodybuilder bro that I suppose I kind of would myself sort of fit into, even though I don't really necessarily identify as one. But nonetheless, I think also there is this sort of relationship, in particular with the West, towards weightlifting. I think it's actually sort of a revealing of these sort of properties that we've always had fixated on, or at least we can look at through our own history and our scientific and philosophical history with matter and the kind of force of using gravity in a way, resisting it quite literally, and the sort of motions, the repetition involved. I think weightlifting has a distinct sort of Western property to it towards the body that kind of has this sort of appeal actually through our ideas and what we find actually interesting and appealing in this Western civilization as a whole. I would equate it similar to the philosophy of yoga in the Eastern world, actually. I would go that far. Weightlifting was around, far prior to just frog posting. And when I just say weightlifting, I'm actually, meaning general fitness as a whole. I don't think that you need to, there is the kind of vain aspect. I don't think that just building a sort of monster physique, of course, is the ends. This is actually quite a superficial, kind of observation towards what I think is, actually at hand, which is the kind of Aristotelian habit, which, of course, kind of goes against, is explicitly, I think, against what the elites would have in their own interest. Testosterone is linked to agreeableness, obviously, and towards the kind of male sex archetype. And so when you have more if you give a population more testosterone, obviously you're going to affect the greater community. But today in this current climate, to even sort of link such things is actually, I think, quite different than what most people would consider today. Everything is kind of just these propositions off alone, and we have a way of trying to navigate without actually interlinking these sort of disciplines together. We've been constantly breaking them apart now. As I pointed out in my last video on the start of Occam and Francis Bacon, this is the start of where Hobbes will come in later and kind of make this sort of distinction between theology and the political, but nonetheless there are matters within theology and the political. So what are we really doing here by kind of creating these subcategories? Of course, that's another video for another day. But I also think that there's more to it than that, and I guess I want to become a little bit more abstract with this and talk a bit particular about muscle hypertrophy, because I think that actually has an element to it that has implications, perhaps philosophically, where your mind in this sort of state of trying to obtain where your body can no longer deal with the exposure of the weight of the motion that's going against gravity. Your body nonetheless has this sort of perception of what your body can really your mind has the perception of what your body can actually pull off. But in many cases, and if you're really trying to push yourself, and if you're in the gym doing hard work, you can actually squeeze that one or two last repetitions out that your mind it's telling you to let go of this thing. Nonetheless, you still push through, and I think there's actually loaded implications of that, where you're talking about your own mind isn't actually able to wrap around your own body's physical capabilities. And when you really put that into kind of perspective, this kind of goes into the idea of empiricism and sort of cognition. It's not just this uh, it's not just out there in this kind of way for us to reach and agree upon with, like, the sort of sciences, if you will. But there's actually a whole lot of cognition and presupposition that, quite frankly, I think also has to do with one's own ecology within the world, one's own revealing, if you want to get Heideggerian about it, I suppose. But I've always been very fascinated with this sort of idea that you can actually have these instantiations where your own body actually is able to overcome what your mind set in its own limitation. And if that's the case, then why isn't that true for other things? Why can't that be true for other matters, and actually even branch them out into these sort of political and philosophical tradition? We're sort of bounded by this, the concept of what we're, thinking, and the sort of cognition, and even the way we see things temporally, and time itself has these sort of presuppositions to us, but yet we're still able to try to overcome that. We're still trying to account for everything, quite frankly, right? This is kind of going into what Francis Bacon and the kind of empirical thought that comes with it goes with towards trying to account for all knowledge, and then we can use the sciences to be able to actually know something about the world and use it to make it as well as possible, would of course be his sort of ethos there. But moreover, to kind of wrangle in the conversation here, I suppose I'd also say that there's something to be said about the kind of state of hypertrophy where you're breaking down your body's own infrastructure, if you will, your own muscle underbellies and that sort of tissue. You're breaking it down to reconstruct again and rebuild anew, and you also have to have the rest has to occur also to get the most out of it. And I also think this is kind of interesting in the kind of Western mind where we can strip something down. We can always be able to rebuild and overcome authority, and we're going to always be able to surpass our predecessor. We're always progressing. We're always doing this progressive overload, if you will, in the kind of fitness community terminology there. But I think that also has the kind of properties towards why something like weightlifting and just general sort of body I suppose bodily aesthetics would be of interest in kind of a sort of reactionary politics that's looking to affirm the civilization that they have inherited. And I think seeing that and affirming it is it's a small step. It's not the ends. You just don't just try to live yourself in this sort of alternative lifestyle, but it's ultimately to also try to actually inspire the world around you and actually get it to go into the direction that you want it to go in, quite literally. And I think this is kind of going into what authority actually is supposed to be, and why naysayers, who anarchists, if you will, who only are projecting their own ideas of what they think authority is and what they would do with authority, which is to exert power in over a kind of ruling class way of just, being the kind of stereotypical tyrant, or tyrant, Aristotelian kind of way of looking at the world. But really, authority in and of itself, and inspiration and that kind of creative aspect to it, has its own sort of rules. You don't actually live above the law. In many ways, are actually adhering to more rules of what it takes to actually have legitimacy than the people beneath you, because you have to follow a very strict sort of way of repeating the creative act that is known to kind of give the results, if you will, and sort of repeat it. There's only really very, very few people in the world who are allowed to actually break the rules and come up with something better. Most people are emulators of those people, and this kind of gets into in your greater polis, the people, the philosopher, or the priest or whatever. They're trying to instruct, they're trying to give authority and inspire the people who are less inclined to even be able to tap into these sort of ideas, how to actually live and be in the world. And that kind of culture and immunity that could actually help the individuals within your community actually sustain themselves and not just fall to the wayside constantly, and really just be relegated to this kind of helplessness state of just referring to wanting representation, and going into this sort of bureaucratic sort of understanding of authority, as opposed to actually equipping people with ways of actually going about the world in this sort of way we problematize matters, and decide what's good and what's bad, what seems right and wrong. Funny enough, the kind of concept of universal goods and that sort of angle is come to pass with modernity and its undermining. But nonetheless, I think if you look at this sort of cynical culture that's developed in a vacuum, I think we do actually have these sort of universals, but they're of course in this sort of negative capacity. It's actually problematized in a sort of we all just agree that there's a problem is ultimately kind of like the universal instantiation. That's we're just all in this kind of free fall is kind of the universal we're actually bounded to, as opposed to actually going in a different way, would be my sort of message overall. And in summation, I would say that to look for this kind of lifestyle is this is just a small step and a kind of greater example. It's not just about muscles and just trying to look good, as it were, but it's actually more about habits in the greater context of the microcosm and macrocosm of the well-being of your sort of society or community as a whole, and arming them with that sort of way of dealing with things would be my message. But yeah, I guess this is kind of really a Bronze Age inspired video, I suppose. And I guess if I'm gonna take a second to sort of give tribute to one of the few people online who I actually interacted with and was willing to interact with me on the sphere, and I think that's important to building an actual community. I think too often everyone kind of, well, not just there's a divisive attitude that goes with it, but too often I think everyone is just trying to look out for themselves, and I think BAP kind of gave evidence that he had some good faith to him if you disagree with him or not. And everyone kind of gets accused of being glow in the dark now, but I think there was some good faith aspects to him and qualities to him for sure. That it's sad to see him lose that account since it had networked so well with so many of the people around that were interested in these sort of ideas. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next one.